know as we know it. But we just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City. One report said, and we can't confirm any of this, that a plane may have hit one of the two towers of the World Trade Center. But again, you're seeing the live pictures here. We have no further details than that. We don't know anything about what they have concluded happened there this morning. But we're going to find out and, of course, make sure that everybody knows on the air.
These are, of course, the two twin Trade Center buildings that are down at the foot of Manhattan, that they really are the beacons of New York. It was there that there was the explosion a couple of years ago, brought about by terrorists. That's all gone through the courts. But this, we don't know anything about. We don't know about anything that has happened here other than the fact that there's obviously been a major incident there. And we're going to go to a special report now from ABC News.
This is an ABC News special report.
Now, by the entire ABC network. Good Morning America was in progress in the East Coast and the Midwest, but we're joined by the entire network just to show you some pictures at the foot of New York City. This is at the World Trade Center. Obviously a major fire there, and there has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. There is one report, as of yet unconfirmed, that a plane has hit the World Trade Center, and you can see that there is smoke there coming out of at least two sides of the building.
And as you said, there are two towers, the tallest structures in Manhattan, on the island of Manhattan. We're trying to get people on the telephone to see what more we can learn. We have no idea if it was a plane. Was it in any sense deliberate? Was it an accident? It does seem to be that there is considerable and truly terrifying damage on some of those floors at the top.
This angle is a little deceptive. As you know, there are two Trade Center towers, and the second tower there is hidden behind the first. This is really almost the picture postcard of New York City. It's that and the Empire State Building, I guess, are the two most recognizable symbols of New York. There you can see the two, well, we had there for just briefly the other angle of the World Trade Center towers, but this is confined to one of the towers on the upper floors. These buildings, I think they're 110 stories each, so this would be in the top 15 or 20 floors there.
You mentioned earlier that, of course, as we all know, years ago there was that terrorist attack. It took place down on the ground and in the underground levels and the garage levels. But again, that's not to imply that we have any reason at this point to believe that this is terrorism or not. We simply don't know. And in just a few minutes, Peter Jennings is going to be joining us from the news desk uptown, where he's going to tell us everything that he knows. We also have Don Daler on the phone, and you know he's been with us on Good Morning America for a long time. And Don, where are you and what do you know?
I'm about 4 or 5 blocks just north of the World Trade Center. And at about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, there was a loud sound that I can only describe as it sounded like a missile, not an airplane. Then there was a loud explosion and immediately lots of screaming out on the streets. And I don't want to cause any speculation, but that's the only way I could describe the sound. And it was definitely not the sound of a prop plane or anything like that.
And am I right? Are you a pilot?
Well, I have flown. I do not have a pilot's license. But I grew up on military bases, and I know the sound of jets, and I've been in war zones and heard those kinds of different sounds. So, again, not to cause any kind of undue speculation, but the sound itself is not of a prop plane. It was perhaps a jet, but it could have been a missile as well.
Can you give me, was it a whining sound, Don, or what?
Yes, it was a how to describe it? It was a high-pitched, but it had a whooshing sound, not like a prop plane.
Huh. And you didn't see anything actually in the air?
No, I wasn't looking out, but we looked out immediately. You can see quite a lot of damage. If it was an airplane, it had to be huge because it hit way up in the World Trade Center. I would say it's probably a good 5-6 of the way up to the top. There's a considerable amount of flame. There's damage on two sides that I can see. On the very north-facing side, there's where looks like is the largest amount of damage. There's a gigantic hole that encompasses a number of floors. I would say maybe 10 to 15 floors. And then on the left side, which would be the east side, there's considerable damage as well, and lots of flames and smoke coming out of it.
You know, I don't know that people outside New York realize it, but these two buildings are essentially cities in and of themselves. I mean, there's 30 to 40,000 people, if I remember the number, and I'm doing this from memory.
Yes.
Number of people who actually work in these buildings, and this obviously occurred at the time that people were coming to work.
Don, are you saying that this sound was striking enough that you heard it before
Absolutely.
you saw it?
I noticed it before the explosion. I noticed a sound like something was very low and shrieking across the sky. And then I heard the explosion.
And which of the two towers is this? Because again, we're just seeing an angle that's a little deceptive.
This is the West Tower.
Mm-hmm. Now we're hearing somewhat faintly in the background, Don, as you talk to us, sirens. Are there a lot of emergency vehicles already on the scene?
Yeah, they're descending. This part of New York City has quite a few emergency stations all over, and I imagine it sounds like they're coming from every one of the stations. In fact, there's one just down the street that sounds like every truck they have is headed that way.
We see, actually, we see two faces. I know you can't see the picture that our audience is seeing, but we see two faces of that tower. One seems to have a rather gaping large hole in it. The other face seems to have two holes in it. It's all somewhat obscured by smoke, one large, one somewhat smaller.
Right.
And of course, we know there are a variety of offices there. There are financial offices there. There are advertising offices, all kinds. We can only hope that since it is still a little bit early in New York, that maybe on some of those floors, some of the offices were still not open for business.
You can now see there on that one side, well, you can see flames now coming actually out of two sides of the building, and I'm minimizing actually the number of openings that are on those two faces of the World Trade Center. There's multiple, it looks like, holes
with fire
or openings
still going on.
On both sides of the tower.
As we've heard before, we said earlier that there was at least one speculative report that an airplane had crashed in, whether deliberately or accidentally, we don't know. And there are continuing reports from people who say that they saw an airplane, one woman saying that she saw a jet going in. So again, Don, a jet screaming that low could be consistent with what you heard?
Absolutely. It could be consistent with what I heard. What I know I did not hear was an airplane, any kind of a prop plane. And I think looking at the damage, I don't think there's any way possible that it would have been a prop plane. It's just too much damage to the building. What's deceptive about the World Trade Center is that it is so huge and so tall that the perspective is difficult to get from the ground. But when you look at the size of the hole, and if you look in context at one of the helicopters going around at a lower size, a helicopter is about the size of a regular Cessna, that kind of thing, the body of the plane. The hole is so much larger than that helicopter that it would have to, if it was a jet, I would have to speculate that it would have to be a larger than normal jet. I mean, larger than like a Citation or something like that. It's just such a gigantic hole, and it blew out the other side. And again, these buildings are almost a city block size building. So for it to have blown in this hole on the north side as well as the west side, it had to be a gigantic explosion.
Well, obviously we don't know if this was if it was a plane, and I underline if it was. We don't know if it would have been deliberate or accidental. We know so little now other than what we can see from these pictures. But the interesting point is there are a number of small airports around New York where passenger corporate jets or private jets will land and take off. And it's not uncommon, if you have ever visited the World Trade Center, when you go up to the observation platforms at the top, you can look down on airplanes that are either coming in for landings or taking off from New York airports. But all pilots who fly in this area know very well where the World Trade Center is located. All the routes are very far or comfortably far away from the two towers.
And not just private planes, too, because with some winds in some directions, even out of the big commercial airports, planes are routed quite close to New York. I've flown in from LaGuardia, even into LaGuardia, but having to go right by the World Trade Centers.
But we emphasize this is all speculative at this point. And just to reset for all of you, this is a special report from ABC News, and we are dealing, and we have to underline this, we are dealing purely in the realm of speculation here as to what may have happened at the World Trade Center. Obviously, a major incident occurred here on the upper floors of one of the World Trade Center towers. You can see multiple openings and flames coming out of at least two sides of the tower at the World Trade Center. And
we just got a report that the Associated Press is now reporting that it was an aircraft. So that's one more witness weighing in, or at least one more source weighing in on the fact that it was an aircraft of some kind.
And as Don Daler reported, this occurred about 15 or 20 minutes ago in downtown New York. And New York time, that would have been about 20 minutes or 8:45. This is a time when literally tens of thousands of people are coming to work at the World Trade Center.
Looking at the top of the building, you mentioned there's an observation center, and I don't know what time it opens, but I think it opens fairly early, and people are up there at all hours of the day. Families, tourists coming in to look at the city of New York on the top. It also there, I don't know if this is the building that has the restaurant on top of it as well, but in those high floors, there are places where tourists team in the morning, even if the regular workers weren't in. And we remind you again that there was a terrorist bomb that did go off at the World Trade Center years ago. It was down in the garage level, but we have no
Obviously,
reason,
no
as we say
indication
over
that
and
this
over
could have
again,
been related to
speculate
that.
in way.
Right.
Now-
Don Daler, ABC's Don Daler, who is on the scene. Don, just give me some description again of what you can see now.
What we're seeing, it appears that there is more and more fire and smoke enveloping the very top of the building. And as fire crews are descending on this area, it does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
Dear
Has
Lord.
I
just
did not
hit.
see a plane go in. That just exploded.
We just saw another plane coming in from the side.
You did. That was out of obscured
Yes,
by
and
my
that's
view.
the second explosion. You could see the plane come in just from the right-hand side of the screen. So this looks like it is some
Lord.
sort of a concerted
Deliberate.
effort to attack the World Trade Center that is underway in downtown New York.
We will see that scene again just to make sure we saw what we thought.
We're going to give you a
replay.
replay of what we just saw, and I must admit I thought it was some sort of fire equipment coming in or some sort of observation plane, but it was obviously designed to attack the World Trade Center. We're going to show you that. Here's a replay of the videotape. In a second, that looks like a good-sized plane came in and hit the World Trade Center from the other side. So this is obviously, or would seem to be, and again, I'm dealing in speculation, but it would seem like there is a concerted attack against one of the towers of the World Trade Center underway.
We had seen a plane coming in from the other direction earlier. I'd noticed it. Had you, Charlie? I didn't know if it was that plane that then circled wide and came back from another direction, but we all watched it, and I just assumed
Don,
that it
could you
was-
hear that? Could you hear that plane as it came in?
I did not hear that plane, but I had to step inside the window because the fire crews were so loud, the sirens, that I couldn't hear you.
I got you.
I did see the explosion, but the side of the building that the plane entered was just outside of my view. So all I saw was this huge fireball and the explosion.
Well, the shot that we've got is now just from one side of the World Trade Center. But this is the shot again. This is moments ago of this second plane coming in, and this is now in slow motion. Oh, this is terrifying, awful.
To watch powerless is a horror.
Dead waiting for the coverage. Dead waiting for the coverage. All right, we're going to go back to live coverage. Now you're looking at live pictures, and there is the second fire, which was brought about by this second plane that hit the tower. And Don, from everything I can see, it was the same tower that was hit the first time, right?
No, it's the second tower.
It's the other tower.
It is the other tower that was hit.
My mistake.
They targeted it, from what I'm seeing on the television. From your view, the two towers are in, one is in front of the other one, but it was definitely the second tower that was hit, about halfway down, not quite as high. And from my view here, it does not seem to be as as big, as much damage as the original. I don't know if that means it was not as big a plane or what. I did not see the plane go in, but it's horrendous damage. But it doesn't seem to be the gaping hole through two sides of the building like on the first one.
Don, from your vantage point, can you see if there are people coming out down below?
I can't see the bottom of the base of the buildings.
There's the wider shot of the two towers. Now, both towers have been hit by planes now in the last half hour, and again, I say we are totally powerless in knowing what's going on here, except that it would obviously appear it can't be a coincidence like this. It would obviously be some sort of a concerted attack against both towers of the World Trade Center. This is again, we're going to show for the third time this tape of the airplane flying in and hitting the World Trade Center. This is slow motion of the plane coming in and hitting the obscured second tower of the World Trade Center. And you can see flame coming out, and I can't see the plane coming down. You know, if it just
Charlie, that's a commercial-sized jet. That did not look like.
No, that's a good-sized airplane. Yes.
Yeah, that's not a little commuter plane. That was a good-sized jet.
And I can't tell if it actually flew into the building or if it just clipped it with a wing. And if it did, of course, then there's the frightening prospect that the plane would have crashed right on the streets of very busy streets of New York.
Yeah.
It seems, and this is a small hope, that the fire may have gone out from the first site. I don't know if we can get the camera in close or not. It doesn't mean that the smoke isn't still terrifying and deadly.
Diane, I can see from here the orange flames. The fire has not gone out. In fact, it looks as if it's encompassing a part of the building that was not initially part of the original explosion. I can see it moving over to the left side, which would be the east side of the first building, almost all the way over to the edge. The back side is totally enveloped in flames that I can see from here.
Yes, with that kind of smoke, there's got to be an awful lot of flame in there. And I think all of us have thought at one point or another about the fact that these buildings, though they are so majestic as they stand above the skyline of New York, that it's very difficult for emergency workers or firefighters to fight these. We have a witness who was called in to speak to us. His name is Harim Haroki. Mr. Haroki, did you, as I understand, they're telling me in my ear, is it true that you witnessed the first plane hit the tower?
Yeah.
Could you give me some sort of a description of it?
I was sitting in my car here in Greenwich, you know. I just saw the plane is coming down from the left side and going straight to the building, you know, and going inside.
It actually went inside the building.
Excuse me?
It flew right into the building.
I saw it coming from the left, and I saw the plane coming through to the building. I go inside. It's a small plane.
You say small plane. Was it a jet?
Excuse me?
Was it a jet plane?
No, it was plane, you know, like they teach the people for the plane is like a small plane, you know. It's that kind of plane.
You mean like a small single or double engine
double
plane.
engine, yeah.
Right, and it actually went into the building there on the upper floor.
Yeah, going into the building. And I never saw that plane before. It's like something, I don't know, it's like they work with the motor. I never saw a plane like that before. Yeah.
All
she
right,
was my car, she's nice.
Mr. Haroki, you are down in that area right now then?
Yeah, I'm in Greenwich here on North Moore Street.
Can you tell if there's a large number of fire equipment and emergency equipment on the scene?
Excuse me?
Can you see fire equipment or emergency equipment on the scene?
I don't know. The fire is upstairs in the building, and the second plane is the other building too.
And did you see the second plane come in?
Yeah, I saw the second plane is going boom. I heard it, you know. I just wake up my head like that. I saw it inside too.
And that second plane much larger than the first?
Same. It's same. Both same.
They're both the same?
Yeah.
Because the pictures we see, the second plane looks rather large.
No, it's not like it's going inside too. It's going inside of the building too. And the second hole, it's smaller than the other one.
And it actually also penetrated the building. You could see it go in.
Yeah, it's inside. It's inside. No plane is outside. Nothing.
Now, can you see if there are people fleeing the building? We don't have shots yet from street level. Can you see if there are people leaving the building?
No, I can't see because I told you on the North Moore and Greenwich, I just saw up the building. I can't see downstairs.
So you're in Greenwich Village?
Yeah, in Greenwich Street and North Moore.
Oh, I see, on Greenwich Street. Okay, yeah. I can. That's just to locate people who don't know New York, that is right in the vicinity, right nearby, but not actually on the site of the World Trade Centers. ABC's Peter Jennings is at the anchor desk uptown here in New York and is now in position. Peter, I suspect you are looking at exactly the same pictures. Well, I know you're looking at the same pictures we are.
We are, Charlie. We've been watching it from the beginning. We'll be watching this for much of the day. There is chaos in New York at the moment. There have been not one but two incidents, as Charlie and Diane have so ably reported so far. The second one coming at 9:03, when television was on live, and you could see what was clearly a jet aircraft flying into the second trade tower. Both trade towers now, these 110-story high towers, have now been hit. There is chaos here, or there's chaos in the immediate area. There is confusion in Washington, because now everybody is engaged in this. The Pentagon is involved in this. All the intelligence services are engaged at this in the morning. And as we look at those towers, let's just simply keep looking at these towers this morning. And if you have the feed at home, I actually don't have it here, so somebody could please make sure that I have the photo picture of what's going on. The various airports in the area, Newark and LaGuardia particularly, have already suspended operations. The city asked the Federal Aviation Administration for permission to close down airspace in all of New York, lest there be a third aircraft or some other untoward incident involved. And ABC's John Miller is with me here, who's been listening efficiently to all of his police sources. And John, I gather the city is ordering a major evacuation from a number of public buildings and a number of these very high-profile targets.
They're going into what they call an Archangel operation, which is a code name for essentially a major lockdown of the city, evacuating the United Nations building, the municipal building, City Hall, Gracie Mansion, which is the mayor's residence, all things that could be considered potential targets, because obviously, because of the nature of this with two incidents, there is the potential that this is a double act of terrorism, and they are worried about other targets.
All right, let's go back to the building itself. John, you work the police radio, if you would, for just a minute. The FBI is already investigating reports that a plane was actually hijacked before this collision, this incident, this attack occurred at the World Trade Towers. In Washington at the moment, the presumption is that this is a terrorist attack, according to ABC's John McWethy, though it's very difficult at the moment for anybody to get a clear appreciation of what has actually happened, because it has happened so quickly. First attack coming just before 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and the second attack, which we could all watch, those of us who are watching television, occurring at 9:03, just 3 minutes after. The president is in Florida, and he has already been told of what is happening. These trade towers have always been, and you may have heard it already this morning, regarded as a prime target for this particular act of terrorism. As you know, there was terrorism at the World Trade Center before 1993. There was a huge bombing attack on the trade centers. These are the two at the southwestern corner of the island of Manhattan, just prime pieces of real estate of interest to anyone who wishes to hit either New York City or the United States in a very, very visible and vulnerable way. We have with us at the moment Lindsay Grimm, a witness who was in the building on the phone. Lindsay, can you hear me?
Hear you.
Can you tell me what you know?
Well, I actually, just to clear things up, I wasn't in the building. I was in the World Financial Center, which is directly behind it.
Okay.
And I was our part of the building faces the section, the courtyard where the World Trade Center is. So we ran to the window right after we felt this kind of this sonic boom, as if it were an earthquake, and something just wasn't right. We ran to the window and somebody yelled, "Oh my God, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center."
Is this what we think of as the first one or the second one, Lindsay?
It was the first one, because I was actually outside for the second one.
And the first one appears to have gone into the southern tower, am I correct?
Correct.
And this second one, did you see the second one?
I had my back facing. I was running as fast as not running, but walking at a brisk pace away from the two buildings when I heard it, and people just started screaming and running.
Now, you know the area fairly well working down there. Is 9 o'clock in the morning the time when people have gathered in very large number? People get there earlier, get there later?
Yeah, I actually just happened. I usually get here a little after 9, and I happen to be here early for a meeting this morning. So, yeah, I mean, you see the general amount of traffic about 9 o'clock. Is that when it happened, right at 9?
No, just before and just after 9.
Okay.
In that there have been two. Can you see outside at the moment as to anything that's happening?
I am outside.
And where are you and what are you seeing?
I am west of the two buildings, looking directly at them, and it's difficult to look at. I'll tell you that much.
This is not an area which is easy to reach for emergency services. These two buildings hug the Hudson River. There's only the West Side Drive that comes up there. Is there a large amount of emergency equipment descending on the place?
There sure is. As soon as I got out of the building, so obviously the first thing you're surrounded by is siren noise everywhere, and you can hear it coming by now, even still.
Anything else you know that you'd like to add?
Just as I was coming out of the building, I heard somebody sort of ushering people away, and they were saying, you guys got to get out of here, it's a bomb.
Many thanks, Lindsey Grimm, who saw this occurring, at least the first, hesitate to call it an attack, the first incident, we'll continue to call it for now, and very much the second one now. That's what it looks like. Both of the towers in the Twin Trade Towers are now on fire. We have no idea whatsoever the measure of casualties inside or the measure of damage inside, though you can only imagine it. The New York City Office of Emergency Management said to us a short while ago they do not know what happened yet. I want to check in very quickly with the President of the United States, John Cochran, who was the President in Florida. John?
Peter, as you know, the President's down in Florida talking about education. He got up out of his hotel suite this morning, was about to leave. Reporters saw the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, whisper into his ear. Then reporters said to the President, do you know what's going on in New York? He said he did, and said he will have something to say about it later. His first event is about a half an hour at an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida.
Thanks, John. John Cochran with the President. President's in Florida today pushing his education reform. It will get wiped off the agenda today in view of this extraordinarily serious accident. For those of you who don't know, the Twin Trade Towers, and it's a popular destination for tourists when they come to New York City. It has financial offices in it. It has government offices. It has lots of access on the top above where this incident actually occurred, where tourists come. It's one of the great views in New York City, and people gather there, certainly at the foot of the building, fairly early in the morning, to be able to go and see it. The two collisions, the two incidents have occurred about 2/3 of the way up. John Miller, we haven't, we haven't had a aircraft fly into a building in New York, as far as I know, since just after the Second World War, when
the Empire State Building.
When it flew into the Empire State Building.
That's right. A B-52 flew into the Empire State Building then, and this is really the first time there's been anything like that since.
John, I was listening as you and Chris Isham, the head of our investigative unit, wandered up here to the rim just a short while ago to saying, one of you, I think, this is something they've been waiting to happen. Who are you talking about? What are you talking about?
What we were talking about is there's been a great frustration since the bombing of the World Trade Center, which the suspects later told federal authorities were intended to take the building down, that it didn't have a larger effect. And U.S. intelligence, FBI people for years have heard that they always wanted to try and finish that job off, to take the buildings out, and that it was another viable target. Interestingly, ironically, whatever you want to call it, the World Trade Center just hired 2 weeks ago the head of the FBI's National Security Division for Counterterrorism in New York to augment and take over their security, pretty much aware of the level of threat that this is as a symbolic target.
One of the things that anybody mounting security in the World Trade Center himself will not be able to necessarily appreciate is what has happened at some distance. And there are a couple of reports, speculative at the moment, drifting around, including one on the Associated Press, which says the FBI is investigating reports of a plane hijacking just before the World Trade Center actually crashed. And John McWethy, our national security correspondent, is with us in Washington. John, what do you know?
Peter, we do hear that there was a hijacking. It is not clear where that hijacking occurred at this point, but it is one of the many things that U.S. officials are scrambling to try to get a handle on at this point.
Anything else, John? What happens at the Pentagon at a moment like this? I know everybody springs into action, but what do they do?
What happens is there is a particular counterterrorism cell within the Joint Chiefs of Staff that goes into emergency basis at this point. They're investigating all aspects of air traffic in the area, all intelligence that, as they sift through it, may have given them some indication that something was happening. At this point, though, there were no warnings, they say. This morning, As they go back through this information, they may cull through it and find some clue, but at this point they believe there is no warning.
Thank you very much, John Whichwood. Please call us back as soon as you have something which would call into question immediately, of course, the notion of counterterrorism in an incident like this. Now, nobody who's watching television, watching Good Morning America today, for example, saw, at least those of us working on television, saw a first plane crash into the building. Much of the country watching television this morning will have seen the second plane crash into the other tower. And we have, as you can see from a distance there, until we get our cameras on the ground producing material which we can put on the air, a pretty limited view. So we have no idea what the evacuation procedure is in the building. We do know...
Difficult. We're listening in the background. At this time, all elevators are out in both towers, according to the rescue workers on the scene. They put out an urgent call for Scott air packs because they're climbing smoke-filled stairwells. They've got to go very high up to get to the target locations, and they're talking about people trapped in the smoke there.
And this, of course, is reminiscent of 1993 when the explosions occurred at the trade towers last time.
Exactly.
John, is it standard operating procedure? You mentioned that all of the other principal government buildings in the city, Gracie Mansion, the mayor's official residence, and some of the other buildings will be evacuated. Is that a fairly standard anticipated operation?
It is an existing plan that is on paper, but Peter, I have to say, it's never been put into effect in New York. This is unprecedented, and I think as this develops, you'll see similar plans go into effect in Washington and potential target buildings, because they really have to take the position that they're under some form of attack here, at least as a precaution, until they sort this out.
As we wait to get a better grasp of what now becomes a rescue operation of the people in the twin trade towers, we're reminded here that the U.S. officials, according to Pentagon sources, have no warnings today of any kind of terrorist attack. And if you listen to the news on a regular basis, you hear the Pentagon warning Americans worldwide of some impending terrorist attack. And here we are in the height of commercial America, with no warning whatsoever, no intelligence whatsoever, as far as we can tell, at least in these first couple of hours.
No, and all of the latest intelligence, at least the basics of which I've been scanning for months, have focused on the high potential for attacks against American targets abroad. Indeed, federal authorities and the intelligence community have reported they've interdicted and interrupted more than a dozen of those attacks by shutting terrorist cells down around the world. They've always been worried since the first attack on the World Trade Center that there would be another bold strike on U.S. soil.
And of course, there are any number of targets which have been high on counterintelligence's list in New York City: the Lincoln Tunnel, the United Nations, the Holland Tunnel, the FBI headquarters, not to mention all of the city civic buildings which John mentions. President Bush is, by the way, going to speak very shortly to the nation about this, and then he's going to return to Washington. And we have on the phone our principal aviation analyst and expert, John Nance. Good morning, John.
Morning, Peter.
What would you like to contribute to this? Because one knows that it is indeed possible to fly an aircraft into a building if one intends to do so.
If one intends to do so, that's correct. And unfortunately, when you've got something that has been as worrisome a target as the World Trade Center, regardless of the way we've hardened it up on the ground, they have apparently, whoever they is, picked the one vulnerable area. The thing that is most disturbing to me is not only the fact, of course, that there are people more than likely in that building that have been directly affected by this, but that we may have an innocent load of passengers. The flash of that second aircraft across the screen is disturbingly close to what you would call the plan form of an Airbus A319 or an Airbus 320, also of a 767 or something of that nature. And that's a large airplane.
John, let me go slowly with you, and we'll actually put it on the screen again, very slowly, so that we can see it come across screen. Are you able to identify specifically the type of aircraft by looking at this videotape as it comes across? Can we roll that, please?
I'm watching that right as it comes across the screen, and it is more than likely not a Boeing 737. That profile, Peter, is very close to an Airbus A320, A319.
And who flies the Airbus 320, 318?
We have quite a few airlines.
Okay, so
very few private ones.
All right, and John comports a little bit here with at least these initial reports that the FBI is investigating reports of a hijacking just before the second crash occurred. We had no... John, let me just ask you one other technical question about just flying in the World Trade Centers. When the first incident occurred, it was reasonable for people to suspect that that was an accident.
Yes.
From a flying point of view, is the World Trade Center always something to worry about if you're taking off for one of New York City's airports?
Not really. And the fact that we have had all these years since that B-25 crashed into the Empire State Building tells you a lot about the flight paths around New York City. You have to be so disastrously out of contact and off course, and so many things would have to go wrong to imperil any of the buildings in Manhattan. The fact that it hasn't happened tells us really how rare a situation it would have to be.
John, the FAA immediately asked for New York City airports to suspend operations. We can confirm that Newark and LaGuardia have closed down.
And Kennedy and Teterboro and Westchester, they've essentially asked all airports within a 20-mile radius to put a hold on anything taken off.
Teterboro Airport, which is in New Jersey, just on the west side of the Hudson River, and Westchester, which is maybe 40, 50 miles north of New York City. They're all suspended operations. Standard, easy to do, John, quick to do, it seems to have been so.
Fortunately, very, very quick to do because they're all controlled by air traffic control towers, and they can put a halt to the operations with one phone call.
Okay, John Nance, thanks very much. Call us back, will you, if you learn anything.
Peter, one of the difficulties they're going to face, as you can glean from this picture here, is the people who are trapped and need to be rescued are on the upper floors, but you see the plume of smoke covers the roof. The last explosion was at the bottom of the building and the smoke rose up, but they were able to make a series of daring rescues by landing, and they've trained for this and retrained, landing police helicopters on the roofs of the Twin Towers and pulling people out. It's going to be very difficult, since the roofs are now enveloped in smoke, for the police helicopters, which are arriving at a landing zone now, just below the World Trade Center, to be able to get up there till that smoke dissipates. And that's where they had expected to pull a lot of people out this time because they had so much success the last time.
Similarly, John, if you look at the two buildings, it does appear that at least in the northern tower there, or the left tower as you see it on the screen, below the incident, the building at least looks on the outside to be reasonably secure, and people will have a long, horrendous, terrifying walk down in a darkened building, but will at least be able to get out on the ground. By the way, Claire Shipman, ABC's Claire Shipman just called in. She's been checking with the FBI. She also says that the FBI had no warning whatsoever. Their crisis management operation in Washington is in place in conjunction with the Federal Aviation Administration. They are all now, which makes perfect sense, focusing on the recovery of survivors. The New York Stock Exchange has delayed indefinitely its opening today. This will just have not only an extraordinary effect on the national psyche, one surmises, dissimilar perhaps, but from what happened in Oklahoma City, but a very clear reminder to those of us in the United States that terrorism of a huge magnitude, with which we're somewhat more accustomed in the Middle East and in Africa, given the attacks on the U.S. embassies a couple of summers ago, but a reminder again that as far as international terrorism is concerned, and people's anger and even desperation on this occasion with the United States is going to find itself manifest here on U.S. soil. John, here's the president now in Florida. I wonder if everybody knows there what's going on. We'll listen to him.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary of Rod Page and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
President clearly shaken, I think one can say, confirming what we think we all knew, which was that 2 aircraft in an act of terrorism crashed into the twin trade towers. Nobody was quite certain about the first one at the very outset, but the president absolutely, having talked to the vice president, the governor of New York, the director of the FBI, now believing and confirming that we have 2 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, and the president saying the 2 things which a president must say at a moment like this: terrorism will not stand, which is an important thing for him to say, but not always necessarily effective, and God bless the victims and their families. John Miller, what are you picking up on the police radio?
There was a bit of a stir a moment ago because LaGuardia Tower reported urgently that there was another aircraft moving fast in the no-fly zone. Now they've contacted that aircraft and they say it's a military aircraft that's rushed to the scene to enforce the no-fly zone and literally be a presence in the area in case there is another plane headed for the building, so that there'll be some at least armed aircraft up to confront it.
Just think for a second, John, how you have drawn an extraordinary parallel. We think of no-fly zones as being in southern
Iraq
and northern Iraq, where the Iraqis are not allowed to fly, and if they do fly, are going to be shot down. Now we have a no-fly zone all around the lower part of New York City, and perhaps on the northern area too. All of the areas, airports closed down, and armed American aircraft in the air to shoot down anybody else who wants to take a shot at the place.
I mean, those are the reports that are coming across the radio now, and if they're true, it's quite incredible and certainly unprecedented.
Well, it would also suggest, as best you can tell, looking at it from this very sort of antiseptic environment that we are all in our newsrooms, is that the reaction has been fairly quick. New York City has an Office of Emergency Management. It's over here on the west side. It's a great bunker. Which the city,
ironically, it's located in the World Trade Center complex, although not in the Twin Towers.
Just
right next door,
north of the Trade Towers,
right.
in the World Trade Center, in the other northern World Trade Center there. And on an occasion like this is not one they absolutely anticipate when they got going. They're talking very concerned with chemical and biological warfare. They've got extensive plans about that, which they very often demonstrate to the press. I'm going to interrupt myself and everybody else for a second because one of our senior producers, Mark Obenhaus, is on the phone, and he saw the incident. Mark, you hear me?
I do indeed, Peter.
Go ahead.
Well, I was leaving my house to go to work, and I walked down the street to go to the subway. I was at the corner of Franklin and West Broadway, and as I was approaching the subway, a tremendous roar went over my head, and I looked up immediately, and it was a plane, and much lower than I've ever seen a plane in Lower Manhattan. And it was a large plane. Couldn't identify it as anything specific except that it was a commercial jet, certainly. And then my eyes followed it because this is approximately 15 blocks from the World Trade Center, and it just slammed right into it and was completely engulfed by the building. It was extraordinary. No wings flew off, nothing like that. It just went directly in, creating this sort of cavern-like hole, and suddenly then big flames started protruding from it, and then of course smoke, and then debris started just catapulting. And of course the area that we're in, there's a great deal of foot traffic, and people are just approaching and beginning to just gasp at just the sight of the building itself. Even if they hadn't seen it, the actual incident, the actual impact, just the sight of this huge building engulfed in flame with this massive cavernous hole in the side of it. And we stood there, I can't tell you the amount of time, I would estimate about 15 minutes. And of course there's all kinds of services coming down, fire department and so forth. And then suddenly from my vantage point, which would be north of the building, the far tower suddenly explodes in flames. Yet again, a similar kind of an event. And I now see, I've run down the street to my home where I have the television on, and I saw that too was another airplane. From our vantage point, you couldn't tell what exactly it was that hit the second tower, but it was a similar, seemingly almost like bomb blast, and with flames and debris protruding wildly from the building.
Mark, let me ask you a couple of more specific questions. You now confirmed for us, I think, that it was the first attack on the tower that you saw.
Yes.
What direction was the aircraft coming from?
It was coming from the north.
It was coming from the north down over Manhattan itself?
Yes. It would have been flying roughly over the west side. I'm on, as I say, West Broadway, which is probably a quarter mile from the river. So it was on a direct path north, from the north, into the north tower.
Do you remember whether it had 2 engines, 3 engines, or 4 engines?
I do not. It was very quick. It struck me, the profile, the body of the plane was of such scale that I immediately identified it as a commercial jet. It happened so quickly I couldn't tell whether it had windows on the side or what. It could very well have been some sort of a transport plane, but it was a large plane. As opposed to occasionally down here you do see smaller prop planes or smaller aviation stuff that flies around here, sometimes doing movies and things like that. But in all my years down here, and I've lived down here for about 20 years within walking distance easily of the building, I've never heard anything like this, and that's why I just immediately glanced up and just followed the track of this sound and this huge plane that was swooping over my head.
Could you see any markings on it whatsoever?
No, I did not. It was too quick. I can't give you any kind of identifying help on what it was.
Do you remember what color it was?
My impression was that it had a tan coloration to it. However, the sun, it was very low in the horizon, and I think kind of orange, and it may have been simply the color of the sun reflecting off a silver exterior. I really am not sure of that.
Okay, Mark. Anything else? What's the mood in the environment down there at the moment? As if it's not hard to imagine.
And everyone who glimpses it close up, it's quite different seeing it from the ground than on these television pictures that I'm now looking at, because it's close to you and you see what the impact must have been like, and you see the kind of devastation that has incurred by the buildings, and it's just frightening is perhaps even too mild a word.
Okay.
It's absolutely just a horrible sight. It reminds you of the worst kind of effects in movies that you're reassured watching a movie that it's an effect, but this is not.
Well, Mark, you and I were supposed to have a meeting not long from now. We'd prefer you to go and work the story if you would, and call us back as soon as you can.
I will indeed.
Many thanks. Mark Obenhaus, one of our senior producers on the phone, who saw the incident, describes it as a large plane, not sure what the color was, not sure the number of engines it had, which in his mind, he's a very experienced reporter, reflects the speed and surprise with which this aircraft, this is the first one we're talking about now, just before 9 o'clock, approached the World Trade Towers from the north, causing the first huge gap in the building. And Mark describes the plane being engulfed in some respects by the building. Didn't see wings fall off, saw it go absolutely, totally, almost as he described it, into the building itself. And we now have had one of the enormous difficulties about terrorism, everybody knows, is that you almost immediately get a claim of responsibility, and you may get several, and people's suspicions get ramped up given the obvious nature of people who they think are or know are involved in terrorism around the world. There has been a claim of responsibility, according to the Reuters news agency, made to Abu Dhabi television in the Persian Gulf from something called the Palestinian DFLP. The Palestinian DFLP is something called the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It has been for many, many years one of the most militant of the Palestinian organizations, has been involved in violence before, has been involved in other actions before, and is the first organization to claim responsibility for this, though we have to caution you in all the obvious ways that before the day is over, there may be any number of people who claim responsibility. The White House, of course, has leapt to the forefront of people's concern this morning, and there is a plane circling the White House at the moment, and they're clearing the grounds there. That's a report which may be misleading in that it may presume an attack, whereas we just discovered a moment ago that what we had with an additional airplane in New York airspace was a security operation. I think probably most Americans know that there is no building in the country which has heavily defended, I shouldn't say deemed secure, but a battery of anti-aircraft missiles on the top of the White House itself. We've had an incident, as you know, in the past, several years ago, where a small aircraft landed in the White House garden, and the pilot, mentally deranged, as I recall at the time, was killed. But the White House is certainly been very heavily defended, and this plane circling the White House adds to the trauma that people are feeling today, but we have no idea precisely what that means. John Miller, you're listening.
The scene is still in some degree of chaos, but the police have set up a major mobilization point just outside the building, and they've set up a tactical mobilization point. The major mobilization point is for the responding units involved in the rescue. The tactical one is actually an armed mobilization point for security outside the World Trade Center now.
Thanks very much. Let's go to the White House. Claire Shipman is on the phone. Claire, what's that we're looking at?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. All we know is it's a gigantic plume of smoke coming from behind the old executive office building, and we're told that the White House itself, the West Wing, at the very least, is being evacuated, that our personnel from there are being asked to leave. We've sent people running over there to try to find out what it is, but we don't know yet.
Now, the old executive office building is slightly to the west and a fraction to the south. So we are looking southwest from a camera just across Lafayette Park, which is north of the White House. The White House is to the left side, out of your picture. Maybe even the cameraman could give us some appreciation. But you have no idea. Was that an explosion? Did you hear anything?
We did not hear it. In fact, we were trying to figure out from the White House what security precautions they were taking around the White House in the wake of the apparent attacks on the World Trade Center, and we suddenly just saw the smoke rising from behind the old executive office building. We have people on their way there now, but it's like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, we've never seen that kind of smoke coming from anything that would ordinarily occur here.
I must also tell you, Claire, I think if you think about what's behind the EOB there, you're really down in pretty open area. It doesn't look like a place where a building would be on fire.
No, that's right, although there are a number of buildings just behind the old executive office building on G Street that could potentially be on fire, but nothing you would necessarily think of as a target. Apparently, we're also...
Claire, let me interrupt you for a second. We now have fire confirmed at the Pentagon. John McCarthy at the Pentagon can hear me. John, please get in touch immediately if you can and brief us in there. John McCarthy has actually been evacuated from the Pentagon, and parts of the Pentagon are indeed being evacuated. We want to hold our breath here, it just seems to me, for a second, and not get into a mode that the country is under attack. But we now have 2 attacks on the Twin Trade Tower Center. U.S. buildings, city buildings completely evacuated in New York City. We have this mysterious black smoke at the southwest corner of the White House, which is to say there's something going on behind the old executive office building. We now have a report that fire has been confirmed at the Pentagon. ABC's John McCarthy, our Pentagon correspondent, who's been plugging in as quickly to the intelligence and counterintelligence units there this morning, has been temporarily evacuated. But that is as much as we know for sure at the moment. John Miller, go back to what you're hearing on your nets.
Actually, it's interesting. In New York City, they're reporting on what we're seeing here also, essentially trying to tell everybody that heightened security is important now.
John, I apologize. There's a lot of us here. What are we listening to there? Say again. Say again, please. Come here, John.
Reporting that bomb squads are checking out Air Force One.
Good. Great. So we have bomb squads.
I think you're going to see a lot of this, and I think we were talking about this a few minutes ago. In fact, when I was telling you that in New York they were evacuating the municipal building, the United Nations, Gracie Mansion, which is the mayor's residence, all potential targets, I suggested to you that shortly in Washington you'll probably be seeing the same kind of reaction at sensitive symbolic locations, and apparently that's become more than a concern, but perhaps a reality.
Okay, we do know, or at least the Associated Press is now reporting, that an aircraft crashed near the Pentagon, and the West Wing of the White House, as Claire Shipman told us, was evacuated amid these threats of terrorism. I guess first of all, let me go to another eyewitness. ABC's Bill Blakemore, one of our senior reporters, has been an eyewitness to the New York incident. Bill, you on the phone?
Yes, I am, Peter.
Go ahead.
I'm down at 12th Street. Looks like we're more than a mile north of this very surrealistic site, and business has completely come to a stop here. Looks like throughout lower Manhattan, people standing in the streets, cell phones aren't working. A few of these phone booths, such as I'm talking to you from now, are working. One man, just shaking his head, said to me a few moments ago, I was supposed to be at a meeting in the building at 10:30 this morning, and then I saw the second plane hit the tower in this flash of light. There's a complete cessation of regular life. There's one delivery man standing here looking like he doesn't know where to go with this stack of beer crates. So all of Lower Manhattan is just standing in the streets on this sunny morning looking at this unrealistic sight in front of us, this gray smoke coming out of the Trade Center.
Okay, Bill, talk to as many people as you can. Call us back when you can. Let's return to Washington visually at the moment. Just take a look at that picture. That smoke behind the Executive Office building, which is right next to the White House, we now believe is from a fire in the courtyard of the Pentagon, or at least where an aircraft appears to have crashed in the general vicinity of the Pentagon. And now the Pentagon is southwest from the White House across the Potomac River, and what we think we may be seeing there, emphasis on think, is smoke in the distance rather than immediately behind the Pentagon. Precautions being taken everywhere. The U.S. Capitol is now being evacuated as a precautionary measure. The U.S. Treasury, according to at least one eyewitness, is being evacuated as a precautionary measure. And there was an explosion outside the Pentagon, and that's an issue of eyewitnesses from both inside and from outside, but we're not quite sure what we're looking at. And we are looking now at Air Force One. We've just been told by ABC's Ann Compton that there's been a serious investigation now, or serious check of Air Force One before the president, who's been in Florida, gets on it and flies back to Washington. All of this, of course, adds to the tension, adds to the fear, but all of it makes absolute common sense. And there is no aircraft in the world, to the best of my knowledge, which is given as intense security as Air Force One, which is what any aircraft the president flies on is designated, of course, wherever it is in the world. And today it's been at Sarasota in Florida. I want to get somebody to fix some monitors here for me, please. I want this monitor in front of me here to look like that monitor, so I know what I'm looking at right now. Thank you. The president will, having already spoken very briefly to the nation, saying, as we said, the obvious and necessary thing that terrorism will not stand, calling for a moment of silence, to acknowledge, to recognize, to honor, to deeply sympathize with the victims of today's attacks. The president then said he would come back immediately to Washington. I think we all know that the president is never out of touch with the events of the moment, wherever he is. But as of the moment, listen to this, as of the moment, from west to east in the United States, there are no airplanes taking off that are at least under the control or are obeying the Federal Aviation Administration. At O'Hare Airport in Chicago, for example, planes are still landing, but all departures have been stopped. The Sears Tower in Chicago, Chicago's great landmark tower, has been closed, and there are no aircraft taking off in the U.S. This is clearly because while we have not been able to confirm precisely what happened. There is for the Pentagon. That is the courtyard of the Pentagon. The Pentagon is indeed exactly what it's described, just on the other side of the Potomac River from the Capitol, and there you see fires burning in the courtyard of the Pentagon, confirming what we'd been told almost immediately by eyewitnesses. We've also been told it was a plane crash. So our belief at the moment is that an aircraft has crashed into either the courtyard itself or into that particular side of the building. Parts of the Pentagon have been confirmed. Oh, you can hear it, just listen. And that's what it looks like from just across on the north side of the White House. Those are the same incidents, to the best of our knowledge, the same incidents. And if you look at the amount of smoke at the Pentagon, this is huge. This is huge. The State Department is now being evacuated as a precaution. We're simply not able to get a good handle yet on what precisely happened at the Pentagon. But we do know that nowhere in the United States, at no commercial airport under the control of the FAA are aircraft taking off. And this is in large measure because it has now been reported by several news agencies that the first aircraft, I beg your pardon, the one of the two aircraft which crashed into the Twin Trade Towers just before and just after 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning was hijacked out of Boston. We do not know the airline. We're not able absolutely to confirm that, but there are several reports, and that led to the intense concern with the FAA and with the National Intelligence Services, all of the airspace in the general area of New York City, and now subsequently in Washington and everywhere else, be sealed as one would try to seal a building in order to prevent a third and fourth, whatever, incident similar to the first two. But that is the Pentagon, and as ABC's John Miller just reported a moment ago, the scene on the ground in New York City is still pretty chaotic. Emergency rigs, emergency services have converged on the Twin Trade Towers at the very same time that other high-profile buildings. Nancy Gabrina, I'm not sure. Do we know if the United Nations has been evacuated yet?
The police department on the New York side has ordered the United Nations evacuated. In fact, they did that very early on, almost immediately after it became apparent what was going on here. Right now, at the World Trade Center, the emergency units are reporting there's still debris falling onto the street on the east side of the building, including a second body, which has fallen from the wreckage on the upper floors. They're also talking about people who are on the roof, and they've asked if the aviation unit from the police department can get up there and pick people up. But again, because of that smoke, as we discussed before, they're going to have real trouble edging in there.
As we look at the Pentagon, again, we have to say that sometimes the camera and the eye don't see precisely what is happening. We have now had eyewitness reports from our sources in Washington say they did see a plane crash in the vicinity of the Pentagon. We're looking at it from the Washington end, which would be to the east of the Pentagon, slightly to the northeast of the Pentagon itself. And it looks very much as if there is fire in the courtyard itself in that central quad. But you can see a small plume of smoke on the northern side of the building as well. At least I think it's the north. Yes, it is the northern side of the building as well. And we're not absolutely certain. The Associated Press, quoting a senior U.S. official, or quoting a U.S. official, is now saying affirmatively that one of the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked after takeoff from Boston. At this time of day, any number of aircraft taking off from Boston to go to ABC's John McCarthy believes that it was an American Airlines flight number 11, bound for Los Angeles. And I realize when saying that, we're going to put the fear of God into a lot of people on the West Coast and people who know, who are connected with that flight. But Our Pentagon correspondent John McCarthy just reports into us that American Airlines Flight 11, bound for Los Angeles from Boston, was actually hijacked out of Boston. That's a helicopter over the Pentagon. I apologize to the audience. We have two separate monitors here. They show different pictures. Could you tell me which one the audience is seeing at home so I can work with that? And may I not have to ask again? Thanks very much. I don't. And so we now have the first incident at the Trade Center and the second incident at the Trade Center. As two aircraft, we know that one of them, we know at this moment that one of them, according to officials talking both to the Associated Press and a confirmation from ABC's John McCarthy at the Pentagon, that it was a commercial aircraft that was hijacked out of Boston, which could have been any time before 9 o'clock this morning, because the first attack on the Trade Tower was just before 9 o'clock, and the second one was after that. And John Miller, you're listening.
Actually, it's interesting. There's no way to characterize any part of this as fortunate, but if you look at cities who are prepared to handle an incident like this, and as you've seen New York's emergency response to this, it is probably one of the few places that is prepared with the kind of equipment, response, and rescue efforts that could actually address something like this. And Washington is probably the other. Immediately when this happened, the entire emergency service unit, which comprises hundreds of specially trained cops, was mobilized to the scene. Now a triage center for the injured has been set up just around the corner from the World Trade Center. It's an incredible scene down there with a tremendous amount of equipment.
The Federal Aviation Administration has actually gone even further than it did a few minutes ago. It was asking all planes not to take off. Now the FAA has ordered all aircraft currently in the air over the United States to land at the nearest airport. Now you can imagine what may be happening, or what they think might be happening in some part of the country, that there is somebody else on some aircraft coming from somewhere or going somewhere with evil intentions. And so all aircraft currently in the air over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport.
I think what you're going to see...
Hang on a sec, Don. I just want to check one thing, because one of the very first people the President talked to was the Director of the FBI, and Pierre Thomas, who covers the Justice Department and the FBI for us, has been here. They may think they prepare for this kind of thing, Pierre, but man, it must have been a shock.
Stunning shock. The FBI Special Operations Center is now in full alert. The FBI extremely concerned that there would be additional attacks. Normally when you have a situation like this, they immediately get on the line with the CIA, the various intelligence agencies, trying to get a sense of who might have been planning something. But right now, the first order of business is to protect against a second attack, third attack. The feeling is normally when you have this kind of situation, there will be more attacks almost immediately.
Let's go to the Trade Tower again, because, John, we now have what do we have? We don't...
Wow. It looks like a new large plume of smoke.
Now, it may be that something fell off the building. It may be that something has fallen. We don't know, to be perfectly honest. But that is what you're looking at, is the current. That's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Stan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter. It's Don Daler down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
Thanks very much, Dan.
It has completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking about.
Exactly. The second building that we witnessed the airplane enter had been, the top half had been fully involved in flame. It just collapsed. There is panic on the streets. Thousands of people running up Church Street, which is what I'm looking out on, trying to get away. but the entire, at least as far as I can see, the top half of the building, at least half of it, I can't see below that, half of it just started with a gigantic rumble, folded in on itself, and collapsed in a huge plume of smoke and dust.
We're talking about massive casualties here at the moment, and we have, that is extraordinary.
There is panic on the streets. There are people screaming and running from the site. The gigantic plume of smoke has reached me, and I'm probably a quarter of a mile north of there.
Peter.
Now this is what it looked like moments ago. My God. The southern tower, 10 o'clock Eastern time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this. If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Peter?
Yes, Dan.
What appeared to happen from my vantage point, the top part of the building was totally involved in fire, and there appeared to be no effort possible to put that fire out. It looked like the top part of the building was so weakened by the fire that the weight of it collapsed the rest of the building. That's what appeared to happen. I did not see anything happening at the base of the building. It all appeared to start at the top and then just collapse the rest of the building by the sheer weight of the top. There was no explosion or anything at the base part of it, but I did see that the top part of it started to collapse. The walls started to bulge out, bricks, glass things coming out, and then it collapsed in on itself, and it appeared to just fold down from there, from the very top.
Thanks, Don, very much. Just looking at that, I don't know why, but when was the last time the United States was attacked in this fashion? It was Pearl Harbor in 1941. John?
From the scene now, there's obviously massive casualties. Usually during these things, there's a little bit of a high pitch, but basic calm over the police radios among the emergency workers. I can hear them screaming, signal 1013, which is the police code for help, calling for help at the triage center, where other people who were already injured have been injured more, confirming that the building has collapsed, dozens of officers, more civilians are injured. And we don't know, although I'd have to suggest, given the size of that building, what progress the evacuation was in of the tower that collapsed.
Yes, Pierre Thomas.
One thing I might add is that in recent years, the U.S. government has been preparing for mass attacks, but it's been primarily focused on biological, often bombing attacks. One of the things I have not heard discussed at all in government circles is the notion that someone would hijack a plane and perhaps fly it into a building. So one of the questions that I'm sure that will come out of this, if this indeed is a terrorist attack, is what kind of defenses did the U.S. have in place to deal with an event like this?
Well, we talked about that even, Pierre, just before you came and joined us, because at the Emergency Management Center, which is just literally in the same complex as the trade towers, they talk at great length about their preparations for a biological, a chemical warfare attack, how they closed tunnel. I mean, they've been very efficient, taken it very seriously for many years. I'd be a little surprised if the notion of an airborne attack on a United States target had not been discussed. But the notion of the intelligence services knowing absolutely nothing of what is going on today and saying openly right away they had no warnings whatsoever is, and you say something very important, if this is a terrorist attack. We just keep saying that on a repeated basis. Not having any notion whatsoever of what's going on is to be reminded not only of the efficiency of terrorism, but just reminded of the efficiency of terrorism at this point.
It's ironic. There's a chilling story. Lou Scalero of the FBI, who was part of the capture of Ramzi Youssef, who was the mastermind of the last bombing of the World Trade Center, told me the story that he was flying over the World Trade Center in a helicopter with the suspect, Ramzi Youssef, next to him after he was captured in Pakistan. And as they passed over, Lou Shalero nudged him and said to Ramzi Youssef, you see, it's still standing. And Ramzi Youssef smiled and said to the FBI's assistant director, it wouldn't be if I'd had more money. This was...
In other words, more money to buy explosives, more money to run a more efficient operation than the one he ran from New Jersey in '93.
Exactly. And I mean, we may have seen the second coming of that plan.
John McCarthy is on the phone at the Pentagon. Hold it, let me just... John McCarthy, we've now heard reports that 3 planes have been hijacked today. Can you confirm that? Jack McCarthy at the Pentagon? Okay, then let me go quickly to someone named Don Wright, who saw the plane crash into the Pentagon. Don, are you there in Washington?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, it was about 9:35, and I was looking out our 12th floor windows at 1600 Wilson Boulevard in Rosslyn, Virginia, and I watched this. It looked like a commuter plane, 2-engine, come down from the south, real low, proceed right on, and crashed right into the Pentagon.
Went directly into the Pentagon?
That is correct.
Looked like a deliberate act?
A deliberate act, sir.
And can you tell me what direction it came from, Don?
It came from the south.
Came from the south, up along the river, across the land?
It came from the south.
Okay, and did you happen to look at your watch? We thought it was just a little bit before 10 o'clock.
Well, I was watching ABC News, watching the Twin Tower, and about the time I saw the plane, I watched it come in very low over the trees, and it just dipped down, came down right over 395, right into the Pentagon.
And are you fairly sure that it was what we sometimes describe and recognize as a small commuter plane?
Yes, it was.
Good, Don. Thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
You're
Don
very
Wright,
welcome.
an eyewitness to the crash at the Pentagon. Now, we have had, as I said, reports today. There are hundreds of reports flying around, and so we beg your indulgence on us saying as often as we do, these are reports. They're sometimes unconfirmed, they're sometimes confirmed. We'll try to make it absolutely clear what we absolutely know and what we're uncertain about. There are now reports around of 3 aircraft having been hijacked today. So we have at least, because we've now had eyewitnesses to 3 apparently deliberate aerial assaults involving the aircraft themselves, 2 on the trade towers in New York City, and 1 on the Pentagon itself, just described by Don Wright as a small 2-engine commuter plane which came up from the south. And we now believe that 3 planes were hijacked, 2 of them from Boston and 1 from somewhere else. We are not yet sure precisely what's happened. John, you're listening. Just to clarify for people, John, who's one of our leading reporters on crime, knows New York City probably better than anybody in many news divisions. I cannot tell you where that happens. That's either U.S. Air Force or Navy aircraft, fighter aircraft, now on patrol in what we've described as the no-fly zone over New York City today, lest there be one more attempt. John, go ahead.
They've continued evacuations in the area now. They're evacuating Battery Park City, which is a large apartment complex taking up many blocks across the street from the World Trade Center. And they've evacuated the federal court buildings where the terrorism trials of Ramzi Youssef and others were held. Anything that could be a symbolic target is now being emptied out in New York. New York is going into kind of a lockdown mode. I think you'll also see in Washington the same kind of air patrols have been scrambled around principal buildings there.
Okay. We have on the phone one of those people who makes his living analyzing terrorism. Kyle Olson, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
I wonder if on a day like this anybody wants to be thought of as an expert on terrorism. Be that as it may, and assuming that, knowing that much of the country is shocked at the apparent breadth of this, are you?
Well, this is the kind of attack that has fallen more into Tom Clancy novels than into actual response planning. Having said that, we've been anticipating for a long time. We've wondered why it's been so relatively quiet. The suggestions of Osama bin Laden's involvement. What has he been doing since Cole? Other groups out there with a real or imagined grudge against the United States. The nature of the event is shocking. The fact that it's happened is not.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Really appreciate it. Kyle Olson,
Yeah, one quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One quick thing. The suggestions that are floating around out there right now. There's apparently this claim from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Right.
Very interesting to note. If this is legitimate, if this claim stands up, this appears to be the first time this group has targeted Americans. This group has primarily steered away from the more extreme end of the violence scale. They focused less on suicide bombings, more on gun attacks and that sort of thing in the territories against Israelis.
Well, if
this holds up, this is a very different tactic.
Well, if it is true, and of course the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine was very much involved in attacking aircraft in the 1970s, which carried Americans. So certainly would accept your notion that it's a recent attack on Americans. Thank you, Kyle, very much.
You bet.
As Mr. Olson makes clear, there has been at least one claim, and those of us who've covered this for a very long period of time are always suspicious of claims. People who cover international terrorism. I'm going to interrupt myself. Linda Douglas, our Capitol Hill correspondent, I think is on the phone, and if she's not, she already reports there has been an explosion of some kind at the Capitol. Is Linda Douglas on the telephone? Let's get her on the phone as quickly as we have. She just reported a couple of minutes ago that the leaders of the Congress, Senator Lott, Senator Daschle, the Republican and Democratic leaders in the Senate, had been taken to some undisclosed secure location. Our general assumption is that there's no panic involved in this, that somebody in the Capitol building, as someone in the White House, has a book which says that when these things happen, Kerr Thomas, maybe you can confirm this for me, when these things happen, there are certain modalities which you behave, and as you see the hierarchy of the American political establishment, the military establishment being attacked, you want to protect the chain of command.
Absolutely. The first thing they try to do is get everyone in secure positions so they can gather information and make decisions about what to do next. One of the things that law enforcement officials had been planning for is the notion of a multi-tiered attack, an attack occurring in multiple places simultaneously. Because one of the things they've talked about is that terrorists want to project more fear, as much fear as possible, and one of the ways you can do it is to have this notion that attacks are happening on multiple fronts.
Yeah, well, and we've never seen anything like this before in the United States, of course, and in fact, not seen anything like this in my recollection. I've been doing this for 30-some-odd years. I don't recall any multitude of attacks. We've had two suicide bombers in a short period of time in the Middle East. We had the two embassies in Africa, in Kenya and in Tanzania, the attack 2 summers ago in the United States. But the notion that terrorists, either an organization or organizations, plural, should be able to mount a concerted effort against the United States in this way, causing in this instance so many casualties, in the instance of the trade tower certainly so many casualties, is going to astound people in the political and military and intelligence establishment.
Absolutely. The notion that you could have multiple attacks like this, they have been planning for it, they had not seen it. This is an extraordinary escalation, one that they were predicting would happen, but no one would think that would happen this quickly.
Okay, John Miller?
I think...
let me just interrupt, I
sure.
apologize again. We're now looking at a helicopter over the Pentagon. That makes perfect sense this morning, but given the fact that we're all sensitive to the presence of any aircraft, that was a helicopter that just flew across the screen. That is, and as we had at least one eyewitness said this was an attack on the Pentagon from the south. He described it quite confidently as resembling a commuter aircraft, which is to say smaller than a small private aircraft and not as large as a commercial jet. It may have been a prop jet. It may have been a jet, but it's a smaller version of the jets which so many people in so many middle-sized American cities are now accustomed to seeing.
In terms of the realm of terrorism, this is going to be a real first test, literally by fire, for the Bush administration. You recall, after the embassy bombings in East Africa, the Clinton administration waited about 10 days and launched a missile attack against the camps of Osama bin Laden, who they felt confident at that time they could say was responsible for it, and who's since been charged in it. In this case, I think this ratchets up.
Excuse me. This is the Pentagon we're looking at now, according to my monitor. And again, it is hard to grasp what part of the building. We do not know if they're in the courtyard or outside, but you can see that a fairly considerable amount of damage has been done. We do not know whether these are offices or storage areas. The Pentagon is full of many thousands of people every day. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, has been saying only yesterday and today that he wants to reduce the bloatedness, as he put it, as he alluded to it in the military and the bureaucracy. But this is the great home of the military bureaucratic establishment. John, before I come back to you, Dennis Cross is on the phone. Dennis, do you hear me? Dennis Cross, do you hear me?
Yes, I can, Peter.
Dennis, I understand that you were in the World Trade Center when either this or these attacks occurred.
Yeah, that's correct. It was, I guess it was slightly before 9 o'clock, and I work on the 36th floor in One World Trade Center. I work in the insurance industry. Probably hundreds of people in my industry in both of these two buildings.
And what happened?
As I was...
Hey, Dennis, just let me stop for a second. Somebody is trying another telephone on this line. Could they please not do that while we listen to Mr. Cross? Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Cross. Go ahead, Dennis.
Essentially, I was, sort of at my desk working, general office activity, and felt an enormous... it almost felt like an earthquake. Like I could literally feel and see things in the office moving and the floor moving. Immediately after it was some sort of explosion or something, there was an enormous volume of debris and paper. It almost looked like a dirty parade. All of this material just falling down. I was looking out the south side of One World Trade, and everybody in the office was kind of screaming, kind of gathering in the middle, and I went to the window, and I immediately saw one woman who appeared to be motionless, laying on the roof of a lower building next to me. At that point, everybody started to gather the things. They were trying to evacuate people down the stairwell.
Did the electricity go out in the building?
The lights flickered a couple of times, and then it was weird. It was kind of like there was one sort of rush, and then shortly after that there was another one. I don't know if it was maybe the other tower or if it were elevators in the inside. Sort of just dropping to the floor.
Are you aware that one of the Twin Trade Towers has now collapsed on itself?
Yeah, I'm about probably 5 blocks from there on the corner of Greenwich and Warren.
And as we looked at it on the screen here, Dennis, we could see the smoke from this collapse just sweep, billow forward through the lower blocks of Manhattan. Did you have a sense of that?
Completely. I was at that point. I'm a little bit northwest, certainly north, maybe to the west side of Tower 1, and I was trying to get to Broadway. My wife works on the other side of downtown here. I'm still trying to get there, but the smoke, I couldn't see. It was a wall of smoke, and if you were in it, you couldn't see. If you were out of it, you could just see the wall of smoke. It was,
How
never
difficult?
seen anything.
I'm sorry for interrupting. How difficult was the evacuation?
That's it. I'm sorry, say that again, Peter?
How difficult was it to evacuate the building from at least from the 110 stories in the building?
I would say that it wasn't extremely difficult. It was just slow going down a somewhat narrow stairwell. If there was any sort of people who weren't able to move quickly, then it literally slowed down or stopped everybody. I was on 36, so it wasn't too terrible. When I got down to the 15th or 12th floor or so, there was water coming in from the doors, kind of at our feet level, and then it just was a waterfall down continually down all of the stairs, probably in some cases 3-4 inches deep. At that, sirens and alarms were going off, and then people started to get a little frantic there.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Okay,
I really appreciate you calling in.
You're very
Dennis
welcome.
Krause, who works did work on the 36th floor of the World Trade Center in this particular tower, which is still standing. There's only one of the trade towers now standing, the other having collapsed on itself not long ago. All of the federal office buildings in Washington have now been evacuated. All federal buildings in Washington have now been evacuated. All aircraft in the skies over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport. All aircraft on the ground intending to go anywhere have been ordered not to take off because the country, this is the Pentagon, because we've just seen a moment ago that at least one portion of one side or building at the Pentagon itself has actually collapsed. And as we warned you, the whole business of responsibility, claiming of and naming responsibility would be complicated. And now we've, from the Middle East, a senior official from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine has denied any involvement, any connection to a double plane crash on the World Trade Center. It was, in fact, earlier on an anonymous caller who had called Abu Dhabi Television to say that the DFLP was responsible. So for today, we'll put aside as best we can I'm trying to understand who did it, just knowing somebody who did it. Now, one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was, as we said some while ago, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. That has now been confirmed by the airline itself, or at least by their spokesperson, Lori Bassani. It was a Boeing 767. It would, under normal circumstances, if it were full, carry about 160 passengers, including 2 pilots, 9 or 10 crew, but we have no idea yet whether or not the plane was heavily loaded or not.
Peter, big concern now from the scene that the northwest tower, the one remaining standing, is leaning and buckling in the northwest corner. They're moving back the mobilization areas, and they're cordoning off the area in a much wider zone now, because obviously they are now concerned about the possibility of a second collapse.
I'm still desperately confused, John, about what may have caused the building to collapse.
As you watch the videotape, it appeared to buckle from the middle, from the point of impact and collapse, which, with no background in architecture, I don't know about the structural vulnerability, but as you see, debris starts to
peel
fall,
away.
Then it cracks, and then it just goes straight down. And now they say that the other tower is leaning. If you look at some of the pictures, it appears to be on a slight angle to the right. They say the fire is also spreading downward now through the tower. And I think there's a real decision to make there. I have not been able to hear whether they're keeping people in there to fight that fire, or they're just leaving it empty to let the fire burn itself out, because they're going to have a real problem with people in there if it's in jeopardy.
At the same time, New York firefighters have a reputation of staying until the very end, and if there are civilians in that building which need to be rescued, and clearly there are, then there's no way the emergency services, I can imagine, are going to pull out at this point.
And if the elevators are disabled from that height, there's no fast way out.
Precisely. 110 stories down, and this appears to have occurred, this occurred about 2/3 of the way up. ABC's John McWethy now confirms for us, we've had from an eyewitness, or he adds to our eyewitness, saying that a small plane heading north, which is exactly what our eyewitness a little earlier told us, exploded at the base of the Pentagon, at the base of one wing of the Pentagon. They evacuated everyone inside, and there was subsequent concern, which may have led to the FAA decision to ground everything, that there was concern that another plane might be inbound towards the Pentagon. And by grounding everything, of course, by ordering everything to be grounded on all radio channels to all aircraft that are flying in the area, it puts the military, Pierre Thomas confirmed for me, it puts the military in a position to take aggressive action, as the White House did when other aircraft had come close in the past.
Absolutely. What it allows them to do is to get a better sense of incoming. If you're ordering everything down, you're essentially clearing the sky so the Pentagon can see what's coming in. Another question that they have to look at here is whether any of these planes might have been laced with explosives to cause the additional collateral damage once the impact occurred.
Yeah, these in every instance, well, I shouldn't say in every instance, certainly in the instance of the Pentagon, it looks more than a single aircraft just exploding on the ground. But again, we don't know precisely the size of the aircraft. We won't speculate on that. But Lisa Stark, who covers aviation for us, confirms that it was American Flight 11 to Los Angeles. There were 90 passengers and crew on board. And there was a second plane. Help me understand this now. So we believe that the two aircraft have flown into the trade towers. Both belonged to American Airlines. And they had both been hijacked. And there were 90 passengers and crew on the first plane and 60 passengers and crew on the second plane. That is if there's any doubt about that, someone please contradict me, but that is the report I am getting from our people who cover the Federal Aviation Administration and air travel in general, that there were 2 aircraft hijacked for this attack on the twin trade towers, now the single trade tower in New York City. And on the first, there were both flights to the West Coast from Boston. And the first one had 90 people and a crew on board. And the second had 60 passengers and crew on board. I beg your pardon. The second plane was not hijacked from Boston, but from Dulles Airport, we're being told, which of course is outside Washington. And we do not know if that was I'm going to make this absolutely clear because this reporting gets muggy. We've now reports of 2 planes from American Airlines, one from Boston, Flight 11 to Los Angeles, which we believe is one of the aircraft that went to the trade towers. We have a second plane, American Airlines Dulles to Los Angeles, with 60 passengers and crew, and that is certainly bigger than a small commuter aircraft, so it may also have been involved in the near. We'll do our best to hand that down as well. Senior law enforcement officials in Washington now tell us that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. That's it's a report now from the Associated Press, about to confirm it with our own people at the State Department, though everybody in Washington has been evacuated from their buildings, that a car bomb has now exploded outside the State Department. And John Miller, I see you writing quite frantically on something else.
It's at the scene now at the World Trade Center. Because of the concerns of the structural stability of the remaining tower, a temporary headquarters mobilization point triage center was set up at Stuyvesant High School, which is about 2.5 blocks up and slightly across the street. Now the concern is that if the building falls, if the second building falls, that it will be falling in that direction. So they are now evacuating their own command post and triage center, and they have to find an even further zone to move that to. Something that is striking about this today is that this is indicative of, with a car bomb at the State Department, a plane crash into the Pentagon, 2 planes designated to crash into each tower of the World Trade Center, bringing one down. It connotes the level of planning and sophistication and extreme logistical ability that probably makes this singularly the largest, most well-coordinated act of terrorism, not just in U.S. history, but probably
certainly in modern times.
In modern times.
Yeah,
unprecedented.
And every time you say that, I'm going to go immediately to Washington now, but every time you say that, I keep thinking of how we are told time and time and time again by the Pentagon and by the State Department that they know something's going on in the world today.
They seem to have the problem at the North Tower, Peter.
Let's look at the North Tower quickly.
Seems to be coming down.
Oh my God.
The second tower.
It's hard to put it into words, and maybe one doesn't need to. Both trade towers, where thousands of people work, on this day, Tuesday, have now been attacked and destroyed, with thousands of people either in them or in the immediate area adjacent to them. There is simply no way to accurately describe the emotion this evokes in people all over the world, friends of the United States and enemies of the United States as well. John Miller, very briefly, you said to us just a few minutes ago that this was their concern, that they thought after the first tower went that the second one was vulnerable.
There was constant intelligence that terrorist organizations, and specifically that financed by Osama bin Laden, was trying to mount another series of attacks against the United States. Of course, they thought of the symbolic targets The most symbolic was the World Trade Center because it had been attacked yet not brought down. And it seems that those concerns that even caused the World Trade Center to hire a senior FBI counterterrorism official just weeks ago to try and beef up security have come home to roost. It's also interesting to say that there is no type of security
which would have prevented against this today. Well, that may not. I was going to say that may not altogether be true because security operates in waves and concentric circles out around the world. Now we've lost the picture from there, so now we have it again. Well, wherever you are in the United States or in the world today, the landscape of New York City has just been changed. And one has to assume that thousands of lives have been extinguished. And it may be presumptuous to say thousands, but thousands of people work in these buildings, and given the difficulties of evacuating these buildings where, as we've said several times, the elevators may not have been operating and were not operating in at least one tower, tower number 2, the first one which is to go, that is the second attack on the southern tower, the first higher on this end of town, but both those towers have now gone. And here's a picture that doesn't exist anymore because that's not a live picture anymore. Good Lord, it just... Now, can I ask where this picture is from? Do we know where this is? This is
outside the World Trade Center. The sign indicates the approach to the
Brooklyn Bridge. To the Brooklyn Bridge. So we're
on West Street, approximately just north of Vesey Street there.
And you can see the dust and debris. And this is I don't know if this is at an early stage or whether this is right now. It's at an early stage because there in the distance you can see at least one of the towers still standing as people wander, many of them dazed. And look at the cell phones in their ears. This is, in a cell phone society, and it's certainly true in the Middle East, people on their cell phones all the time, seeking and offering reassurance to their families and their friends that something has happened. In Israel, and at least those with them in the Palestinian territories these days, there's constant traffic on the cell phones because there is such tension in the region and such tension here today, which is extraordinary, that people wanting everywhere to reassure or find out about what has happened to those who are near and dear to them.
One thing we should update for people listening, particularly in this area, who may have been worried, there was a concern that if this building...
You mean in the New York City area?
Yes. There was a concern if this building fell that it would land on the center they had set up at Stuyvesant High School, where the students were still there. The reports from Stuyvesant High School now are that everybody there is okay.
Stuyvesant High School, the high school in the adjacent area, which the city and the state authorities set up to deal with the casualties that they could get out of the building or had occurred adjacent to the building. It is just clear that a lot of people, we do not know how many, got out of the building. And it is going to take time. It is going to take time. The New York City Office of Emergency Management, which monitors the city and all its vulnerable points, said when this whole thing began this morning, they could not get an immediate handle on precisely what was happening. And it was only, you've seen this before, this is a recording of precisely what happened when the second tower went down. And this is from a very long distance. This camera is located on the edge of the Hudson River on the West Side Drive up the western side of Manhattan. And I cannot say this is something that people never believed they would see in the United States, because, of course, Oklahoma City was when we all had that reaction, when Americans experienced terrorism in the heartland for the first time, believing in many cases that it all happened somewhere else. But I just think that millions of Americans will be stunned by the magnitude of this today. I'm trying to track down John McWethy, our correspondent at the Pentagon. He was evacuated. I'm saying this as much to our control room as anybody. He, like everybody else, was evacuated. And I'd also like to talk, if I may, to Claire Shipman at the White House to see what the progression is there, and Linda Douglas at Capitol Hill, because we do know that the leadership of the Senate, at least, Senator Lott and Senator Daschle, were moved to a secure location while much of this was going on. But it is very difficult to get through on anybody's cell phone, and this is, Pierre Thomas, another reminder of, you wonder if this is something that people anticipate. We now live in the age of cell phone. We now rely on cell phones for so much. When there's chaos like this, too many people on the cell phones, they don't work.
Well, one of the things that they had to deal with today, Attorney General Ashcroft was en route to Milwaukee today. And now with the planes grounded, he's going to have to communicate by phone. They have an internal communication system at the Justice Department that they use in situations like this, video monitors. But again, everyone is dispersed, and with the planes grounded, this created a scenario that they had, quite frankly, hadn't seen before.
It is the grounding of the planes which pretty much brings to a halt. I mean, one assumes that Air Force One with the President is already on its way back to Florida. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. ABC's John McWethy is on a cell phone at the moment, and while he cannot hear me, somebody can tell him to start talking, please, and we'll listen. Okay, we'll try that again. Anytime John McWethy begins to talk and tell us what's happening at the Pentagon, or as much as he knows what's happening at the Pentagon, we will simply let him go. But it's just very difficult to get through on cell phones. Thousands of people trying to find out where their friends and their relatives are. Thousands of reporters, news organizations, city organizations, state organizations, federal organizations, trying to understand not only what happened today, which in some respects is secondary, but to get something done. And just so much agitation around. You get a report just a couple of moments ago from the security at the Capitol Police saying that they believe a hijacked plane may be bound for the Capitol. There's an intensity in the air and a fear and a trauma in the air at 20 minutes to 11 Eastern Time in the United States, 20 minutes to 8 on the West Coast, or in the western part of the United States. The day has just getting beginning, and all of this has happened in just under an hour. The first attack on the Trade Tower was just before 10 o'clock. The second one came at 3 minutes after 10. We have a strike on the Pentagon, which came a little after that, and the country is just riddled. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, I'm sorry. The country's just overrun, as it's inevitable it would be with rumors. I'm curious, John, in terms of the emergency operation that you monitor, are they in a sense of panic? Are they or just in a sense of chaos?
In a sense of chaos. There was a brief sense of panic, which is understandable when the first tower collapsed. By the time the second tower collapsed, they were prepared for it. There were numerous other injuries. The level of coordination is incredible. The FDR Drive, which is a main artery, has been shut down for the purpose of keeping it clear for ambulances to go to hospitals. They've anticipated that the lower Manhattan hospitals in New York City will fill up, so they have started to arrange helicopter flights to go to hospitals further out in the circle. They've really been pretty well coordinated throughout this. If you can possibly be coordinated during a series of spontaneous events that amount to disaster.
This is war, and war by another definition. We did manage to get Rebecca Cooper, one of our reporters, on the phone from the White House. That's how difficult it is at the moment to communicate. Rebecca, do you hear me? Rebecca Cooper at the White House, do you hear me? All right. The same case with Rebecca says with John McCarthy at the Pentagon. If we do hear from them, we'll simply interrupt and let them get
Hello?
on talking. Yeah, Rebecca, do you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I hear you. I'm in the basement of 815 Connecticut Avenue. It's a building across the block from the White House, across the park. You know where that is, next to the Chamber of Commerce. I had to come down here because, as you said, none of the cell phones are working. I'm in the engineer's office, and they've given their phones to use. There's a real dichotomy here at the White House, Peter. Tourists who still are not fully aware of what's happening across the nation are standing there watching with curiosity. They keep getting moved back. But those of us who are inside the White House realize the severity of the situation. I was inside the White House this morning trying to gather information for you when we were told by a very nervous White House security staff that they feared a plane was headed to the White House, and we heard planes indeed overhead, and they quickly evacuated all of us out of the White House. Now, I just got off the phone with my own crying mother who was very worried about where I was, and I will tell other mothers and fathers of people who work at the White House and reporters who work at the White House that most of the White House has been evacuated. In fact, in the building where I am now, people have cordoned up other offices to try and coordinate the federal response to this. There are actually phone calls being placed to the legal counsel of the FAA from this building because they don't have cell phone connections. They are out of their offices. They are doing a good job of coordinating the federal response from here, but they are having to take all kinds of emergency measures to coordinate.